Welcome to the Key of Imagination. This week we'll be looking at the Twilight Zone episode, The Chaser. We'll talk about the difficulties that come with love and emotions. We'll dissect what makes Professor Daemon different from others in this kind of story trope. And I'll reveal to you my moment of awe, a disturbing thought involving the potential future of this episode's key character. So, grab your keys and let's open up this door to the fifth dimension. You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Roger Shackleforth is a man in love. And just who is it that has captured his heart? None other than the enchanting Leila. From the moment we meet Roger, we realize that this is a man who will do anything to win, or get, the affections of his Leila. When our lover boy makes a visit to a curmudgeon named Professor Daemon, he quickly realizes that there are other ways to win someone's affections. A little alchemy will do the trick. Better living through chemistry, sometimes known to us throughout history as a love potion. It doesn't take long for Leila to fall madly in love with Roger, and all is right in the world. Happy ending. Well, maybe not all happy. It is a bit annoying just how much Leila loves Roger. In fact, it's downright detestable. Roger can't seem to get a minute to himself. She's always there, loving him. You know what? Chemistry is what got Roger into this, and chemistry is what's going to get him out of it. And so Roger pays one more visit to the professor for his famous glove cleaner, a potion that gets rid of problems and is completely undetectable. And just as Roger is about to administer his anti-love potion, Leila unveils an adorable knitted sock, the perfect size for a perfect little bundle of joy. As the glove cleaner solution falls to the floor, so too does Roger's jaw. The Chaser is directed by our old friend Douglas Hayes. The teleplay is by Robert Presnell Jr., but it's based on a short story by John Collier entitled The Chaser. As for our cast, we've got George Grizzard as our lover boy, Mr. Roger Shackleforth. Patricia Barry plays our lady of interest, Leila. And John McIntyre is our alchemist extraordinaire, Professor Daemon. The episode first aired on May 13th, 1960. As for our tidbits, Martin Grams Jr. details the business behind procuring the rights to telling this love story. As usual, Grams Jr. does an excellent job of making what is mostly dry business into an interesting narrative. But here is the part that caught my eye. Collier, the original author of the short story, sold the rights to Robert Presnell Jr. so that it could be made into a play in 1951. Presnell, at this point in the story, owns the rights to the live performance. When producer Buck Houghton was looking into getting the rights for the Twilight Zone, he was actually able to get them directly from Collier, and at the time, Houghton wanted Serling to adapt it for the show. But they went with Presnell for the teleplay seemingly because of the fact that he had already previously adapted the short story for television/theater. I bring this up because it's interesting to think what Serling could have done with this story. Just letting my thoughts kind of wander here a bit. I think it would have had more bite with Serling in a couple of ways. First, I think there would have been more intrigue with the professor. We'll talk about him more in our second question. But I also think Serling would have probably made Leila more interesting. Obviously, there's no way to know this as fact, but Serling had a way of writing incredibly tight scripts, so I do think he could have made some improvements here. As for my initial thoughts on this watch-through, it's not one of my favorites. When it comes to entertainment, I don't actually consider myself to be overly critical. What I mean is that I actually appreciate when writers and directors try to do something, even if they fail at it. I like taking chances, not for chance's sake, but for a legitimate vision. To me, this episode lacks a bit of vision. You've got a careful what you wish for kind of storyline, but what makes it different from the probably thousands of others? Not much. And that's my problem. The acting is perfectly fine, a little hammy at times, but that, I think, was intentional. The cinematography, specifically the door sequence when Roger first enters the professor's abode, reminds me so much of playing the old Resident Evil games on PS1, where you just see the doors opening as transitions from one room to the next. So that was a nice little bit of nostalgia for me. But what do we walk away with from this story that we don't get from something like The Monkey's Paw? Again, not much. In fact, that line kept coming up in my head as I rewatched this. Not much. And yes, I do realize that I've opened myself up there for quite a joke if anybody wants to take it. What's in your head, Joe? Not much. Question 1. What does this episode want to say about love and emotions? It would seem odd not to address the romantic relationship itself in this episode, and yet I wanted to do so in a way that can both potentially uncover a fairly unique way of reading our protagonist, Roger, and also provide some information for some of you out there who might benefit from the research I uncovered here. Now, granted, I'm an incredibly blessed man with a happy marriage, and, it's not that we don't have our difficult times like everybody else in every other relationship, but I would not want to be on this journey of life with anyone else, period. But the anecdotal evidence, that I hear at least, all points to the fact that romantic relationships are incredibly difficult now, especially for young adults, but for everyone, is my understanding. We can certainly blame social media, the loss of common points of popular culture interests, and all manners of divisiveness in the way we talk to each other. But I'm going to go a different route here and use our characters to paint another side of the picture. First, let's get a better sense of our man, Roger. When we meet Roger, he's holding up the line of a payphone. Now, for my younger audience members, payphones were mobile phones that were too big to fit in your pocket, so they would put them in a big glass enclosure. And sometimes British doctors would use it to transcend space and time, and high school students would use it to kidnap celebrities that they could then put into their history presentations so they wouldn't have to go to summer school. That was my past. Yeah. Roger is obsessively putting coins into the phone, hoping that the love of his life, Leila, will pick up and talk to him. When he does finally get through to Leila, he says to her, "I must see you, darling. Must. Furiously, fiercely, darling. Must." Now, when I teach rhetoric to my college students, I often try to help them remember that pathos is an emotional appeal, and I try to do so by hamming up some kind of Shakespearean Romeo and Juliet and saying things like, "Oh, the sun doth not shine any more since thou hast left my side." Now, I try to get them to remember pathos by asking them, how is this person acting? And somebody eventually says, pathetic. That's right, pathetic, pathos, and emotional appeal. But in reality, I could really just show them this clip of Roger, and it would probably work just the same. To get serious for a moment, let's say that Roger actually does feel this way. For anyone older than about 16, we all know that such feelings can become quite problematic if they're not properly reflected upon and contextualized. In fact, Leila even says to him, "Roger, you've got to stop this. You're acting like a baby." I think the hamminess of the acting that's what's bringing out the hamminess in me in this episode. I apologize up front. Or maybe I don't. Maybe I apologize for nothing. Such feelings can, of course, become much more serious, like deep-seated infatuation and obsession. But rather than move right to that extreme, let's actually talk about how we can better avoid these terrible emotions by building healthier relationships. Let's talk about healthy emotional regulation. Okay, I can already hear some of you out there. "Joe, I thought you were the sappy emotional type. You recite Shakespeare, you study poetry, epic narratives, and you talk a lot about emotions." Yes, guilty as charged. However, for me, a part of a healthy relationship is understanding how we balance the value of the self in relation to our romantic partners. My wife is everything to me. But in order to be everything to her, I have to understand how to regulate my own emotions and energies so that I can be my most available self. If you're constantly obsessing over your romantic partner, it will lead to not only most likely the end of your relationship, but it leads to terrible results in terms of one's own mental health. I found a fantastic peer-reviewed article that talks about a direct relationship between Romantic Obsession and Psychological Well-Being. In the article, Mizrahi et al. Conclude, as the intensity of relationship-centered obsessive-compulsive symptoms increases, there is an associated increase in emotion regulation difficulties. Moreover, it was found that as the severity of relationship-centered obsessive-compulsive symptoms and emotion regulation difficulties increase, psychological well-being decreases. In layman's terms, the more a person obsesses over the relationship, the more difficult it is to regulate one's own emotional state, which leads to a decrease in one's own mental health. Now, if we're being our most charitable to Roger, we can say that his choice to pursue using the elixir is a result of his compromised mental health and a genuine belief that no one will treat Leila with as much love as he will. But we could also just as easily and just as fairly say that he's a jerk and kind of a creep. But there is something else here for us to pursue as well. At one point in the episode, Leila is kneeling at Roger's feet while he's trying to read a book. He says to her, "Couldn't you please sit in a chair?" To which she replies, "Oh yes, my darling." But it's what she says right after that line that is really telling. She says, "Which chair?" This response is typical of someone who has given over all agency to another person, and it's not a good thing at all. We don't want people to give up their agency, even in relationships that are not abusive in nature. What I mean is that long-lasting relationships tend to have a healthy push and pull effect. If one of the partners is growing more reticent about making decisions in their lives, that can put a strain on the relationship. When I went to the research to look into the role that submission plays in relationships, I got a lot of articles that had to do with domestic violence, which is understandable. It's a terrible problem, and it's something that we have to continue to learn about and prevent. However, the situation with Roger is a little different from that. What I found was an interesting article by Pietro Monaco et al. That discusses power dynamics in a romantic relationship, and I think the results they found in their study can help us understand Roger's situation with Leila a little bit better as well. In the study, Pietro Monaco concludes the link between low power within relationships, as in never having a say in key decisions about the couple's goals and submission, is particularly important in romantic relationships because submissive responses, e.g. holding back, are associated with poorer relationship functioning, probably because submission limits people's ability to achieve core relational needs and goals. In the case of Roger and Leila, Leila is submissive, but I don't think it's because of a loss of power. In fact, Leila does not really know that she has no power at all. That is the real magic of the love potion. It's not that it makes people fall in love. We've been doing that forever as a species. It's that people fall in love and they don't even know that they've given over their agency. Because Leila doesn't know that she's done this, she has no need to push back, no need to find her places to take a stand on something. In short, there is no power dynamic in their relationship because Leila is like silly putty. She simply takes on the shape of whatever comes her way. So what is this episode trying to say about love? I think it wants to teach the value in emotional regulation. It wants to remind us that healthy romantic relationships require a push and pull from both sides. And if someone wants to sell you a love potion, you're probably better off just buying the person you're interested in a cup of coffee and trying to have a conversation with them. Question 2. What makes Professor A. Daemon unique among the others of his kind in story? Now, when I talk about others of his kind in story, I'm referring to the tempting devil motif. You can find this everywhere in our literature. The idea is very much the same. The contractor has something that the contractee wants: power, fame, knowledge, money, etc. What seems to always connect these tempting figures is a kind of confidence. They know that someone is desperate or hungry for this knowledge, and that gives them a kind of upper hand in the negotiations. But that's not really the case here. It's a bit of an odd scenario if you think about it. So let's do just that. Let's think about it. When Roger meets the professor, we find this curmudgeon man who seems to simply want to quickly make his transaction and move on with his life. He's yelling at Roger to get on with it. But Roger has no idea why he's even there. This is the first odd thing about this professor character. He has strange motivations. The professor clearly values money enough that he charges a premium price for the glove cleaner because he knows that this item has the most value and it's an answer to a problem that he himself creates. It's a brilliant model, and it's one that we are very much seeing today in colleges and primary schools all over the world. Let me explain. Undoubtedly, you've heard about how schools everywhere are struggling with students using large language models like ChatGPT to cheat and have their essays for school written for them. The students get an assignment, they run it through the prompt, these large language models, and out pops a paper that is, many of the times, worse than what they could have produced on their own if they had just done the assignment. That's a bit of truth behind the scenes coming from someone who has to deal with this a lot. But what's really interesting about this is that sometimes it happens that a school will use a company that built the large language model to generate the essay, and then the school will pay a pretty nice penny to the same company, not always, but sometimes, to the same company, to identify that it is AI-generated content. So this company gets money from both ends. It's the love potion and the glove cleaner in real life. In the case of the professor, it seems odd to me that he has this business savviness. It's not that it doesn't make sense. He's human. Humans need money. Get the money. It's that we end up losing a bit of the mystery and intrigue that is often involved in the transaction that takes place in this usual deal with the devil scenario. The second thing that I find interesting about the professor is the way in which he pushes the glove cleaner, especially in his first interaction with Roger. He mocks Roger for saying he wants his Leila's love by saying, if it isn't his Leila's love, it's his Dorothy's love, his Rhea's love, his Gwen's love. The mockery being that the pursuit of love is so commonplace, it's boring. Again, that's perfectly fine, but then he says, tell me, are you sure you wouldn't be interested in the glove cleaner as I call it? There are many names for it, including the Eradicator. Clean, colorless, tasteless, and unidentifiable for sure. Finally, when Roger says, I'm not interested in glove cleaners, the professor adds this. Why not? It's sure, it's swift, it leaves no trace, it's perfect for its purpose. What's interesting and a bit different about this character versus, say, someone like a Mephistopheles from Faust or your typical devil in disguise is that the professor seems a lot more interested in what he wants than the person who is being tempted. In this case, he finds someone wanting the glove cleaner to be interesting because it's much more of an accomplishment to make a glove cleaner than it is a love potion, which he refers to as the cheap parlor trick of his profession. That makes me think of him as a child. Have you ever seen someone, maybe even you, give a small child or a dog a really nice gift only to see them play with the box it came in or the wrapping paper instead? As I write this, I'm fully prepared for that to happen with at least 2 people this Christmas. That's right. That's how I see the professor here. In short, he's bored. And that's odd for this type of figure. Additionally, he's quite a needy fellow. He really wants people to recognize his achievements and hard work, and if they don't, then they're not worthy of his trade. Which reminds me of a certain soup-serving character from Seinfeld who would do the same thing. If you didn't appreciate how hard he worked to create the soup and respect his rules, he would kick you out of his establishment and say, "No soup for you." I think we can finally state our answer to the question. What makes the professor different from many of the other types of literary figures like him? Well, it's that he's incredibly insecure when you break it all down. And I actually find that it makes him less interesting. Question 3. What are your moments of awe? I had the oddest moment as I was finishing up writing for my first question. I realized something. In a lot of ways, this episode actually mirrors A Nice Place to Visit. In that episode, Rocky Valentine gets everything that he wants, wins at everything he plays. But what makes it a hell scenario is that he only ever wins. There is no sense of losing, no sense of fighting for something, no struggle, no work to put into anything, and thus no difference in his day-to-day life. This is exactly what Roger is also facing with Leila. She does whatever he wants, thinks only of what will make him happy, tries to make it so that he is always winning. In short, he's in a kind of hell. Now, what would make this even worse is if the baby turns out to be similar to Leila in that the son or daughter is always asking Roger what he or she can do to make him happy, to please him, and make him proud. Now, we certainly want children to court some sense of making their parents proud. But I would think that most parents would also realize that kids will need to make their own mistakes and find their own ways in the world. For the sake of the kid, I hope Roger just ends up with a very loving wife and a perfectly normal child. As for my rating, I've already probably given away that this is not going to get a particularly high rating from me. And the idea that the big reveal is that, Leila's pregnant now, and so Roger is kind of stuck with her is a bit much for me. I mean, I get the joke. It's kind of the humor of the Twilight Zone. I'm going to give this episode a middle-lower tier. I think it just barely squeaks out of the lower-upper tier based upon some decent acting and some good direction and cinematography. But I mean, it's just barely making it into the middle tier. In fact, if I have to keep talking about it, I'm going to put it back into the lower tier. I'll do it. I'll turn this rating right around. Next time, we'll be taking a look at A Passage for Trumpet. And here are your questions to consider when watching the episode. Question 1. Why does Joey think the music only comes out beautiful when he's drunk? Question 2. What do we make of this in-between life and death space? And question 3. What are your moments of awe? I've got some comments to highlight from the YouTube channel, but I encourage people who are listening through Spotify or any of the other platforms to leave comments as well, or email me comments. I'll talk more about that at the end of the episode. On my trivia post in my community tab for the A Stop at Willoughby episode, PHX Dog comments, "The second time he," meaning Gart, "dreams about Willoughby, he's getting closer to letting go. He does not question the conductor about Willoughby. He's excited about seeing it again, but he's not ready. That's the reason why he goes back for his briefcase. He goes back to his life, not willing to let go 100%. That is why the train starts moving, and the conductor ignores his calls." This is a great point, and I think it's one that we can easily miss. That brief moment when Gart goes back for the briefcase on the second dream is a fantastic choice by the creatives for the episode. It shows that Gart has in fact moved closer to getting off the train, but as you say, he's not quite there yet. These are the kind of moments that I think we need more of in our television and films today. Nuance, small movements that add up to larger payoffs when you think about them more carefully retroactively. Of Infinite Jest had a great comment on the A Stop at Willoughby episode itself, writing, "The basic idea in all of these tales is nostalgia or a wish for another time, another place, a far different life that, real or not, represents a dream or vision of a more calming existence than the distilled madness modern civilization has created for us. While in ICU and near death from a gunshot, Tony Soprano's coma dream of a better, more simple life, one free of the turmoil of his family versus the family, has a stunning and emotional resonance with this episode of The Twilight Zone." Thanks for the great connection and thoughts of Infinite Jest. In fact, a few of you brought up the pull of nostalgia today. I don't find the pull to nostalgia concerning as much as I find why and how we're doing it, which I think many of you would also agree with. The term nostalgia goes back to the Greek, nostos, so it has been with us for a very long time. I don't think it's unhealthy to have a kind of longing for something beautiful from the past. However, what Gart is doing is actively seeking to escape the present and actually live in the past. That is a sign of an unhealthy mind and culture, and I think it's probably a bigger problem for us as a civilization than we might even be willing to recognize. Kelly Stanton 7378 also had the following to say about the Willoughby episode. Excellent as usual, Joe. Willoughby has always been one of my favorite Twilight Zone episodes. Garth Williams is such a tragically relatable character. I would describe his experience as, at best, major burnout, and at worst, an existential crisis. Whether our jobs are great or small, don't we all at some point wonder, what am I doing all this for? The shark-infested eat-or-be-eaten atmosphere depicted here also reminds me of Serling's other scathing indictment on the corporate world, patterns. Kelly, as usual, great stuff, and thank you for the kind words. Patterns is excellent, and you can often find the 1956 version on YouTube, which I highly recommend, if for no other reason than to play one of my favorite games, Find the Twilight Zone Actors Bingo. There are quite a few of them in there. But again, if you haven't seen or read Patterns by Serling, definitely check it out. It's fantastic. You can continue our conversation by heading over to our Discord server and either starting a conversation about this episode or taking part in one that is already happening. The link to join the server should be in the episode notes section. You can also head over to thekeyofImagination.com where you can rate this episode, learn more about me, watch previous episodes of the show, and check out my Curios page where I showcase some of the Twilight Zone trinkets I've bought over the years. I encourage people to email me thoughts and comments, whether it's about a particular Twilight Zone episode, your rating for an episode, or about the Key of Imagination show. You can get those to me as a text email, an audio clip, or even a video clip of roughly no more than 5 minutes to keyofimaginationshow@gmail.com. Keep in mind, even though we talk about some serious topics, we're trying to maintain as family-friendly of an atmosphere as we can. If you would rather I not use your comments on the show, please indicate that so I can respect your decision. If you enjoyed the show, I ask that you please take a moment and do one of the following, if not more or all of them, to help build our community. Rate the show, review the podcast, leave comments, thumbs up, all of the usual algorithmic, oh, I've done this so many times. I should have this down pat. Algorithmic gymnastics. I'm keeping it in. That will help get the show in front of more people and help us build our community of Twilight Zone fans. However, even if you do none of that and absolutely hated every minute of this, which someone just let me know that they do in the comments not that long ago, and I did what I said I'm going to do here, I would still like to thank you for spending some time with me. Until next time, remember, all doors are open to those who possess the key of imagination.